Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James, and welcome back to our Unity 2-player tutorial series. So now that we've got our 2 players in the game and they're able to fire snowballs at each other, let's start making it an actual game so that we can take points away as we go doing damage to each other. So the first thing we're going to need to do is create a simple little interface to represent the health of our players. So I'm going to go up here to Game Object, and we're going to create a UI text. So what UI text does is create a big, huge, massive thing which will overlay in our window. So although it's big, massive in our scene space here, back in the game view, it actually just takes up whatever the size of the game view is. So we're going to get the text that we've just created. I'm going to rename this. We're going to call it Player 1. It's really difficult to see, so we're going to scroll down here and change the color to be a bright white color like that. And I'm going to make the font size a little bit bigger too. So if we look back here in our normal view, we can see it on the top corner there like that. And because it's in the top corner, what we want to do is make sure that we set the anchor to be in the top corner like this as well, so that when we change the size of the game view, so if we change this to maximize, this line is actually just cutting it off a little bit here, but it shows where the position of the player actually is. So I'm actually going to move it in a little bit like this. Oh, no, that's the wrong thing. Nope. There we go. I'm clicking the wrong buttons altogether. So there we go. We can see it moves up there just the way we want it to. So we have the name of our player, and then we're going to have a few sprites to represent how much health the player actually has. So we're going to right click on the text, and I'm actually going to write here, before we do anything else, we're just going to say player 1 there so we know which player we're referring to. And then we're going to right click on that, and we're going to go down to UI here, and we're going to add an image as a child. So it makes a big white image there. We'll actually go back to our scene view to mess around with this here. But what we want is to use these tiny little candy canes that we have in our art file. So I'm going to drag this one in here, and we're going to pop that in source image there. We're going to make sure we preserve the aspect ratio, because otherwise if we were to say pull it like that, that's not very good. If we pull it like that, that's not very good either. We're going to hit preserve aspect like that so that it will stay the same square kind of shape. And I'm going to drag this one over to the left here like that so it lines up there. And I'm just going to duplicate this a few times. So I'm going to hit Control and D, and then I'm going to drag it to there. Control and D, drag it to there, Control and D, and one last time there like that. So we've got our 5 little candy canes there. So now if we switch back to our game view, and if we maximize it, we can see those are the 5 little bits of health that represents how much health player 1 has. So we need to do the exact same thing obviously for player 2. So let's just go back here. We're going to duplicate player 2 like that, and we're going to drag this object over to the right hand side. And now that this one's on the right, we want to set the anchor for this to be on the top right. And then down here we want to set the alignment to be the right as well, so that it's over to the side that we want it to be. Change this to say player 2, and we're going to drag our 5 candy canes over to the right like this. So it just kind of roughly lines up with the edge of player 2. And then now we see we have player 1 on the left, player 2 on the right. Perfect. Just the way we want it to be. So we have our basic kind of UI set up here, nice and simple. One thing we also want to add, which will be invisible for the time being, but we want to add a game over screen for whoever wins the game. I'm just going to rename this to be player 2 actually, just while I'm looking at it here. So we'll go back up to our canvas. We're going to right click on this. We're going to create a UI image like this, and we're just going to leave it as this kind of simple image. We're not going to replace it with anything else, but we are going to resize it so that it is bigger than the entire window. And then here we're going to make sure, instead of just being anchored to the center, we're going to have it so that it stretches to fit the full size of the window. So now it's bigger than the window, so it will always be bigger than the window. That's just the way we want it to be. And then what we're going to do is change the color of it so it's a black color, and then we're going to take the alpha value, which makes it see-through, and pull it down roughly to about there. That should be okay. And then on that we want to add a UI text, and this text is going to be centered in the middle, and we're going to make it a little bit bigger like this. Change the color to white, and we're going to say game over. Nice and simple. That's what we're going to do for now. We'll make some changes to this as we go, but for now we'll just have game over. Okay, so if we look back in our game view, we can see this will be on the screen, but of course we don't want this to be showing up the whole time, so we're going to disable that like that. Okay, so now that we've got our basic kind of UI set up, we need to actually make some logic that will handle the score of the players as we go. So what we'll do is create a new script down here. We're going to create a C# script that we're going to call our game manager. We're going to open this up in mono develop. So once this is open, take a second down here. Okay, so in our game manager, we obviously need to know about the object that is our player 1 and our player 2, because when we run out of candy cane, so say player 1 loses all 5 of his bits of health, then obviously we don't want player 1 in the world anymore, so we're going to say we'll destroy player 1 when he runs out of health. So here we'll say public game object P1. No, actually we'll say player 1 for now. And obviously we need player 2, so public game object player 2. Then we need to keep track of how much life each of them have. They'll both have 5 life to start off with, so we'll say public int P1 life, and then public int P2 life. And the reason we use ints rather than floats for these numbers is because ints are just whole numbers. So you can't have a 1.5 or anything. You can only have 1, 2, 3, a million, a billion, whatever, but they have to be a whole number. So we'll only be dealing with whole numbers for their health, so it makes sense to just use ints rather than floats. So now that we have a number to keep track of our players, let's go through and just kind of set up the logic of how this is going to work. So basically what we'll need is a check in our update loop here to see if our either the life of either of these players has gone down to 0. So we'll say if P1 life is less than or equal to 0. So just in case it somehow goes below 0, just in case our player gets like 2 snowballs hitting them at once somehow. So we'll say if our player 1's life is less than or equal to 0, then we'll say player 1 dot set active false, because we just want to deactivate the player. We don't necessarily need to completely delete the player. And then at the same time, what we want to do is turn on our game over screen. So at the moment we don't have any reference to our game over screen, so here we're going to say a public game object game over. So we'll of course hook up our little game over screen here, but so then at this point we can just say, okay, player 1 is dead, game over, screen set active is true. So we're activating the screen that says game over, and that lets know that someone has lost the game. We need to do the exact same thing with our player 2. So actually what we'll do is, rather than rewriting it all, we'll just copy the same code, paste it in there, and just change all the player 1 references to be player 2. So we can save that. So now we have the basic logic of our game set up, but of course at the moment there's not actually hurting our players at all. So we'll need to make some methods that will do some damage to our players. So we'll just create 2 very simple little functions that will just be public void hurt P1, and in a bracket like that, and we'll have another public void that will be hurt P2, and a couple of brackets, and then a couple of curly brackets. So within our hurt P1 here, basically what we want to happen is whenever this function is called, and this function will be called by a snowball hitting against the player. So what we'll say is, okay, whenever our hurt P1 function is called, basically all we want to do is say P1 life minus equals 1. So what that'll do is say, okay, just take away 1 away from whatever our current P1 life is. So we'll do the exact same thing for hurting player 2. So that'll be P2 life minus equals 1, like that. Okay, so that's the basic logic of it set up, and we can go into the game and kind of, or we can go back into Unity and just kind of set these values up that we just established. But of course, at the moment, they won't actually do anything because our snowballs are just hitting against our players and not actually interacting with them in any way. So I'm just going to set up these basic things first. So we're going to attach to our canvas, we're going to attach the game manager script. Then we're going to drag player 1 into the player 1 slot, player 2 into the player 2 slot. Both players will have 5 life when they start off, and then we'll have our game over screen here like this. So as I said though, nothing will actually happen in our game at the moment. So we need to make some adjustments to our snowball script so that it actually do some damage to the players. And we need to add something so that our snowballs will know which player they're hitting against. At the moment, they have no way of knowing. The only thing distinguishing our players from anything else within the world is the fact that both of our players are on the player layer. But they're both on the player layer. So our snowballs could be hitting either of them and it wouldn't make any difference. So the way we're going to use, or the way we're going to be able to tell between them is by adding a tag to each player. So if we go to tag up here, you can see there's some default options which are kind of not really suited for our purposes. There's a player tag, but we want to be able to distinguish between which player we're hitting. So what we're going to do is, oh sorry, I should have said that while we were there, but on the tag drop down, we're going to go to add tag. Then on this little list that we have here, we're going to hit the plus symbol, and we're going to have the option for a new tag, and the new tag we're going to use will be player 1, and then we're going to add one more tag, and this will be player 2. So these tags are what we're going to use to be able to tell between which player is getting hit. So now we can go into our scripts folder and go into our snowball script, which is back here. And so when we have here where our snowballs are hitting the wall and then instantiating the effect of the snowball bursting and then destroying themselves, before we do that, what we'll do is add an extra little check in here and say if the other object, so that's what we have here, collider to the other, so we're looking for what the other collider is. So if the other object has the tag which is equal to player 1, and you need to make sure that this bit of text we put in here matches up exactly with the type of tag that you give. So for example, if back here on our player, if we we didn't actually apply the tag to him, I just realized we created the tag, so we should actually apply them here. But just for example, if we had put a space between player and the number 1, you need to make sure that you put the space in back in our script here. So you need to have the space exactly like that, and it will work perfectly fine with spaces. You just need to make sure you keep them the exact same as what you put in. So we have if our other tag is player 1, then what we want to do is we want to find our game manager within the world, and we know that there's only one thing within this world which will have the game manager script attached to it. So what we can say is find object of type game manager, like that. And what that will do is it'll try and find any object in the world that has a game manager script attached to it. And once it finds that, what we want to do is say dot hurt P1. So that'll run the hurt P1 method on the game manager script back here. So that'll run hurt P1 and it'll take 1 away from the player's health. So I'm just going to hit the semicolon because we need to make sure we add a semicolon at the end of every line. And that's basically all we need to do for hurting the player. So we can just copy this exact same thing for player 2 and just adjust it so that it's looking for the player 2 tag and that it will call the hurt player 2 function. And we can save that. And now what we can do, what that means is our snowballs should work the way we want them to. So we go back into the game here, let that compile for a second, and I'm going to leave it on the canvas then, which has our game manager scripts attached to it, so we can see our player 1's life and our player 2's life. So if we hit play here, once we get going, if I throw a couple of snowballs, you see our player 2 life is being taken away. And if we throw some snowballs to player 1, you can see player 1's life has been taken away. And then when we completely destroy the player, it's game over and player 2 wins. So you can run around for a little bit afterwards, have a bit of fun and go, hey, I'm the best. Which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. But of course, our candy canes up here are being not very active at the moment. We've set them up, but they're not actually doing anything. They're not feeding back anything to the player playing the game, and they don't really know what's going on. So what we need to do is make a reference to these candy canes within our script. And the way we're going to do that is using an array of objects. Arrays are very simple. It's basically essentially a list of objects within the world that we can cycle through to turn individual ones on and off is how we're going to do it. So when our player has 5 health, we know that we want to leave all 5 of these on. When our player has 4 health, we want to turn off the last one and leave 4 of these on. And basically we just do the exact same thing for however many objects are on within the game. So to do this, we'll obviously need a reference to an array of objects. So we will go and create a new public game object array. So those 2 square brackets at the end are what make it an array of objects. Rather than just being one individual game object, this will be an array of objects however long we need it to be. So you could have 10 candy canes if you wanted to, but we're just working with 5 here for the moment. So we'll say public game object array that we'll call P1, we'll call them sticks because they're candy cane sticks or whatever. P1 sticks, and of course we need public game object P2 sticks as well. And then what we'll do is whenever our player gets hit or hurt, so down here in hurt P1 and hurt P2, we're basically going to loop through the array one by one and decide whether each individual one should be turned on or not. And the way we do that is using a for loop. So for loops work with 3 basic little ideas. They need a number to start off with. So this will be our int I equals 0. We're just creating a new int value that we're calling I, and we're going to start it off at 0. We're saying as long as I is less than our P1 sticks array dot length. So we will have 5 sticks in our array, so we know the length of it will be 5. So as long as I is less than 5, we're going to keep going through this loop, and we're going to say if I is less than this length, then we're going to add I. We're going to add I one by one as we go through this loop, basically. So we then need to set up what happens within our loop. So if basically if our player's life, so if our P1 life is greater than whatever I is at the moment, then within our array, so within our P1 sticks array, so we know we've created the array, so within that we can look at a certain number. So we're going to say whatever the current I is, and I'll explain through how this loop is working in a minute, but we just want to set this here. So whatever our current position within the array is, we want to set, if our life is greater than whatever the number currently is, we want to set the current one to be true so that we can see the candy cane. So just before we go any further with this, for example, we've got 5 candy canes in our array here, but the way arrays work is the first object in the array is 0, the second object is 1, third is 2, then 3, and then 4. So although our array is 5 items long, when we're talking about it, the item is actually kind of -1 of it. So the first time we go through this, well, that should be a capital P, I just realized. The first time we go through this, our int I will be 0. So we know we're talking about the object at position 0 here. So what we're saying is if our health is greater than 0, then this object at position 0 should be on. So that's fine, and we loop through to the next part of the array, and we say if our health is above 1, which is this position here, so if our health is above 1, then we know that we have at least 2, so our object here should definitely be on, and so on through the whole little kind of array of objects here. So that's fine, that's making sure that they're all turned on, but how do we know if they should be turned off? Well, if our life is greater than whatever I is, then we know it's on. So otherwise, we can just say, well, if it's not greater than I, which is by default what is happening if we say else here. So otherwise, basically, what we're saying is, okay, if our health isn't greater than whatever our current Y is, then we should turn off the current candy cane within the array. So we'll say p_on_sticks.I, or p_on_sticks array I dot set active is false. So that'll turn off the object within the array. So we can save that, and then that's basically all we have to do with our little array here. So obviously that works perfectly fine for player 1, but what about for player 2? Well, we need to do the exact same thing within hard play P2 here, but we need to change all of these to be P2. Why is P2 sticks being wrong there? Because that should be a capital S there. So P2 sticks, P2 life, P2 sticks here, and P2 sticks there. So perfect, we can save that, and now we'll go back into our game, and we need to hook up all our candy canes into arrays when they appear down here. So because we're going to be moving a bunch of different things here, I'm going to lock the inspector. So if we hit this little kind of padlock symbol up here, it'll lock it so that no matter what items we click on, our canvas object here will always be kind of highlighted. So we're going to go to our P1 sticks first. So that'll be, I'm actually going to switch to scene view so that we can actually see this in effect. So we want to drag them in one at a time. So we'll start with the one on the left here. So that's this one. We'll pop that in there. Then we'll go to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and then finally the last one. So that's our 5 setup here. So we need to do the same for P2 sticks, but for this one, we want them to be in the reverse order, because rather than it the health counting down from the right like this, we want it to count down towards the end like that, because our player 2 was on the other side. So we'll say, rather than starting at the bottom, or sorry, at the top here, we'll start at the bottom. We're going to drag that in there. Then we'll drag this one here, this one here, this one here, and finally this one there like that. So now we have 5 set up. Oh, I just realized we have we somehow missed one in our previous array here. So now we need to drag that there and kind of, this is the problem with arrays, because they're a little bit awkward. You can't just kind of reorder them. So what we'll actually do here is put this array back down to size 2, which will chop off the last 3 entries, and now we need to drag these back over again basically. So I just need to, why doesn't that want to drop into position there? There we go. This is one of the finicky things with Unity, kind of making sure you drop things in the right place and stuff like that. But there we go, that's our 5 canes set up for player 1 and player 2. So now when we hit play, we should see not just the numbers over here going down, but we should see the candy canes going down at the same time. So there we go, we see player 2 taking some damage like that, and we see player 1 taking damage that way. So perfect, that's our little system setup. But of course, this game over screen is kind of generic, so we're going to quickly, what we're going to do is say, I'm going to rename this to, instead of just saying image, we're going to say P1 win for this. And we're going to duplicate it and say P2 win for this one. And then we're going to change the text that both of these guys say. So I'm just going to turn them on here. Oh no, I was highlighting. Oh, I turned off the overall thing. I forgot this was still locked. So we'll unlock this here. So actually we'll do this one at a time. So we'll say player 1 win. We're going to turn this on. And instead of saying game over, we're just going to make it say player 1 wins, and we'll do the exact same for the other one. Here we're going to say, oh, we need to turn it on first so that we can actually see it. We're just going to say player 2 wins like that, and then we have both those objects, so let's hook them up in our script. So instead of saying that they're both turning on game over, what we're going to say is, instead of game over screen here, we're going to have P1 wins and public game object P2 wins. So down here, instead of game over being set active when player 1's life goes down, when player 1's life goes down, we want to say, okay, player 2 wins should be true, or should be activated. And when player 2's life goes down, we want to say player 1 wins should be set active. So we can save this, go back in, let that compile for a second or two, and go back to our canvas, and we need to hook these up. So player 1 wins, we'll drag that one into there. Player 2 wins, we'll drag that into there. So now we can hit play, and now when one of our players kills the other one, player 1 wins. Perfect, just what we wanted to happen in our game, and exactly how we want our game to work. So there you go. The basics of our game are now all working just the way we want to. So what we need to do next is just kind of enhance things and make everything a little bit more logical. So the first step of doing that, in the next episode, we're going to take a look at adding some sound effects and some music to the game. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.